Have you ever felt that sting of injustice? That moment when you're singled out for no reason and your power is stripped away in a heartbeat? We've all seen videos of public meltdowns, but the story you're about to hear is different. It's about a woman, a brilliant aerospace engineer, who faced the ultimate public humiliation at an airport gate. A gate agent, drunk on a tiny sliver of authority, decided to make an example of her. But what this agent didn't know was that her actions were being watched, and the karma that was about to be unleashed wasn't just swift. It was catastrophic, delivered by one of the most powerful men in the aviation industry. Stay with me. Before we begin, comment where you are watching from today, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Now let's get into it. The air in Terminal 3 of Chicago O'Hare International Airport was a familiar symphony of chaos. The low hum of fluorescent lights, the distant roar of jet engines, the staccato clicks of rolling luggage, and the murmur of 1,000 conversations blended into a single palpable energy. Dr. Evelyn Reed barely noticed it. For her, airports were liminal spaces, mere bridges between one part of her life and the next. Today, the bridge was leading her to Washington, D.C., where she was the keynote speaker at the annual FAA Global Aviation Symposium. Evelyn was a woman who commanded respect without ever demanding it. At 42, she was one of the lead propulsion engineers for a major aerospace firm, a mind that helped design the very engines that powered the Airbus A380 she was about to board. Her hair was styled in elegant professional locks, a few silver strands catching the light like threads of wisdom. She wore a tailored navy blue pantsuit, practical for travel, but sharp enough to signal she meant business. In her leather briefcase sat her laptop, a copy of her speech titled "The Future of Sustainable Air Travel," and the prestigious Collier Trophy her team had won the previous year. She approached Gate K-19 with the quiet confidence of a seasoned traveler. The flight was for Transcontinental Airways, a carrier she'd flown dozens of times without incident. The boarding area was already a sea of anxious passengers, families trying to corral restless children, business travelers typing furiously on laptops, and couples whispering about their vacation plans. Evelyn found a seat near the window, overlooking the massive aircraft being prepared on the tarmac. She felt a familiar swell of pride. To most people, it was just a plane. To her, it was a marvel of physics and engineering, a testament to human ingenuity. She checked her watch. Boarding would begin in 20 minutes, plenty of time to review her notes. As she pulled out her tablet, she noticed the gate agent station. There were 2 agents on duty. One was a young man, probably in his early 20s, who seemed efficient and polite as he answered a passenger's query. The other was a woman who appeared to be in her late 40s. She had a severe blonde bob that looked helmet-like, and her lips were pursed into a thin, permanent line of disapproval. Her name tag read Carol. Carol was tapping her acrylic nails on the counter, her gaze sweeping over the waiting passengers with an air of bored disdain. It was a look Evelyn had seen before, the look of someone who felt powerless in their own life and wielded their small measure of authority like a weapon. Evelyn had learned long ago to navigate such people with a calm, almost detached politeness. Create no friction, give no reason for conflict. It was a survival tactic she shouldn't have had to learn, but the world was what it was. We will now begin pre-boarding for Transcontinental Flight 782 to Reagan National, the younger agent David announced into the microphone. We invite our passengers in need of special assistance and families with small children to approach the gate. Evelyn watched as a few families and an elderly gentleman in a wheelchair made their way forward. Carol handled them with a perfunctory, almost resentful slowness, snatching their boarding passes and barely making eye contact. Next came the first-class passengers. Evelyn was in this group. Her company always booked her in first class for long-haul or important trips. It was a place to work, to rest, to arrive prepared. She stood, gathered her things, and joined the short line forming at the priority lane. When her turn came, she stepped up to Carol's counter. David, the other agent, was busy helping another passenger. "Good morning," Evelyn said, offering a small, professional smile. She held out her boarding pass and her passport, open to the photo page. Carol didn't return the greeting. Her eyes, a flat shade of blue, flickered from Evelyn's face to her documents and back again. She took the passport and boarding pass from Evelyn's hand. The silence stretched. Carol scrutinized the passport photo, then looked up at Evelyn, her head tilted. She did this 3 times, as if trying to find a discrepancy that wasn't there. "Something wrong?" Evelyn asked, her voice still pleasant, but now tinged with a note of caution. "I need to see another form of ID," Carol said, her tone clipped. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Evelyn's smile faded. This was unusual. A passport was the gold standard of identification. "My passport is a federally issued valid form of ID," she stated calmly. "Is there a specific issue?" "Policy," Carol snapped, her fingers tapping impatiently on the counter. "We reserve the right to ask for secondary identification. Do you have a driver's license?" Evelyn felt a familiar prickle of annoyance, but she suppressed it. Arguing would get her nowhere. She reached into her purse, retrieved her wallet, and produced her Illinois driver's license, placing it on the counter next to the passport. Carol picked it up, comparing the photo to the passport and then to Evelyn's face again. The line behind Evelyn was growing, and she could feel the impatient stares of the other first-class passengers on her back. A man in a pinstripe suit cleared his throat pointedly. "Everything matches, doesn't it?" Evelyn said, keeping her voice low and even. Carol ignored her, placing the 2 IDs side by side and staring at them. She then turned to her computer terminal and began typing, her keystrokes slow and deliberate. Each second felt like an accusation. Evelyn could feel the blood rising in her cheeks, a mix of frustration and humiliation. She was being singled out, put on display. She glanced behind her. The man in the pinstripe suit was now glaring openly. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" he asked, directing the question not to Carol but to Evelyn, as if she were the one holding up the line. Before Evelyn could respond, Carol spoke, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'm just running a standard security verification. We have to be extra careful these days." The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Extra careful. With whom? With her, a successful black woman in a tailored suit. The unspoken message was clear. You don't belong here. Evelyn took a deep, steadying breath. "I fly multiple times a month for work," she said, her voice now cold and precise. "I have TSA pre-check and global entry. I can assure you my documents are in order. My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed. Please check your system again." Carol's lips twisted into a smirk. It was a fleeting expression, but Evelyn saw it. The woman was enjoying this. "Doctor, you say? What are you a doctor of?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescending disbelief. "Aerospace engineering," Evelyn replied flatly. Carol let out a short, derisive huff. "Right. Well, doctor, my system is flagging your ticket. It seems there's a payment issue." Evelyn's composure finally cracked. "That's impossible. This ticket was booked and paid for by my company weeks ago. I have the confirmation email right here on my phone." "I don't care about your email," Carol shot back, her voice rising in volume. "The system says what it says. You'll have to step aside. I have other passengers to board." She gestured dismissively to the side of the counter, a clear order to remove herself from the line. The public humiliation was complete. Heads were turned. People were whispering. The man in the pinstripe suit pushed past her with a muttered, "Finally," and handed his pass to the other agent, David, who shot Evelyn a brief, apologetic look before processing the ticket. Evelyn stood frozen for a moment, the injustice of it washing over her. This wasn't about a payment issue. This wasn't about security. This was about a woman named Carol, who had looked at her, made a judgment based on prejudice, and decided to exercise her power. But Evelyn Reed had not reached the pinnacle of her male-dominated field by backing down. She took another deep breath, her mind shifting from defense to offense. She was not just a passenger anymore. She was an engineer, and this was a problem to be solved. And the first step in solving any problem is to gather data. She stepped aside as instructed, but she didn't leave. She pulled out her phone, opened the camera app, and pressed record. The red dot on her phone's screen was a small, steady pulse. It was a silent witness. Evelyn held the phone discreetly by her side, angling it up towards the counter. She wasn't aggressive, not yet. She was documenting. The priority boarding line was now moving quickly through the other agent, David. Each passenger he processed glanced over at Evelyn, then at Carol, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, pity, and mild annoyance at the disruption. Carol, for her part, seemed to swell with self-importance. She had successfully excised the problem from her line and was now pointedly ignoring Evelyn, organizing papers on her desk as if she were the busiest person in the terminal. After the last of the first-class passengers had boarded, Evelyn calmly approached the counter again. This time she went to David. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a model of restraint. "Your colleague mentioned a payment issue with my ticket. Could you please double-check that for me? I believe there must be a mistake." David, who couldn't have been more than 22, looked flustered. He glanced nervously at Carol, who was now glaring at him, a silent warning in her eyes. One moment, ma'am." He typed Evelyn's name into his system. His brow furrowed. "That's odd," he mumbled, more to himself than to her. "It shows here the ticket is fully paid and confirmed. Status is green across the board." "Exactly as I thought," Evelyn said, a sliver of relief cutting through her anger. "May I have my boarding pass and passport back, please? I'd like to board." Before David could answer, Carol stormed over, planting her hands on the counter between them. "I am the lead agent here," she snarled, her voice low and menacing. "And I said there's a problem. The system you're looking at hasn't updated. The fraud alert came through on my terminal." "Fraud alert?" Evelyn's voice rose slightly in disbelief. "What are you talking about? This is a corporate booking. It's the same way my travel has been booked for 15 years. "Things change," Carol said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "People get clever. We've been warned about sophisticated ticketing scams." She looked Evelyn up and down again, her gaze lingering on Evelyn's designer briefcase. "You'd be surprised who's trying to get away with things." The accusation was no longer veiled. It was blatant, ugly, and directed at her with the force of a physical blow. The remaining passengers in the general boarding line were now openly staring, their conversations dying down as the drama at the gate agent desk escalated. "I am not running a scam," Evelyn stated, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage. "I am a keynote speaker at a federal government symposium. I'm an aerospace engineer, and you are making baseless and defamatory accusations." She felt a hand on her arm. It was a woman from the line, perhaps in her 60s, with kind eyes. "Dear, maybe you should just wait for the next flight. This woman is clearly on a power trip." Evelyn appreciated the sentiment, but backing down now was not an option. This was no longer about a flight. It was about her dignity. "Thank you, ma'am," she said to the woman, "but I have a right to be on this plane." She turned her attention back to Carol. "I demand to speak to your supervisor, right now." Carol laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. "You can demand all you want. I've already called him. He's on his way, and he's going to tell you the exact same thing I am." As if on cue, a man in a slightly too tight airline uniform hustled towards the gate. He was sweating, and his name tag identified him as Bill, the duty manager. He had the harried look of a man who spent his days putting out fires, and he clearly saw this situation as just another blaze to be stamped out as quickly as possible. "What's the issue here, Carol?" he asked, not even looking at Evelyn. "This person," Carol began, gesturing toward Evelyn with a flick of her wrist, "has a ticket that's been flagged for payment fraud. I told her she needs to step aside and contact her company, but she's refusing to cooperate and is causing a scene." Bill finally turned to Evelyn, his expression already one of deep exhaustion. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. But if the system flags it, there's nothing we can do here at the gate. You'll have to go back to the ticketing counter outside security and get it sorted out." "There is no issue," Evelyn insisted, her frustration mounting. "Your other agent just confirmed the ticket is paid and valid. She is lying." She pointed a finger at Carol. "This woman has been hostile and discriminatory towards me from the moment I walked up here. She questioned my ID, she insinuated I was a criminal, and now she's invented a fraud alert to prevent me from boarding." Bill sighed, rubbing his temples. He looked from Evelyn's phone, which she still held pointedly in his direction, to Carol's smug face, to the long line of impatient passengers. His calculus was simple: remove the source of the conflict. In his mind, that was Evelyn. "Ma'am, I'm not going to argue about this," he said, his tone one of finality. "Carol is a senior agent with a 15-year unblemished record." He was lying, or at least ignorant. No one has a 15-year unblemished record in customer service, but it was the shield he chose to use. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the gate area. If you don't, I'll have to call airport security." The threat of security, the final tool of intimidation. Evelyn stared at him aghast. He hadn't listened to a word she'd said. He hadn't investigated. He had simply sided with his employee, defaulting to the path of least resistance. He saw a problematic passenger, not a victim of prejudice. "So you're not even going to verify my claim?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You're not going to look at your own system to see that she is fabricating this entire story?" "I trust my agent," Bill said stiffly. "Now please, you're holding up the flight." Evelyn felt a profound sense of despair mixed with a white-hot fury. This was how it happened. This was how injustice was compounded, not just by the actions of one prejudiced individual, but by the cowardly indifference of those with the power to intervene. Carol, emboldened by her supervisor's support, saw her chance to deliver the final, crushing blow. She snatched Evelyn's boarding pass from the counter where David had left it. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger. "You are not getting on this flight," she hissed, her eyes glinting with a triumphant malice. And then, with a flourish of theatrical cruelty, she ripped the boarding pass in half. She tore it again, and then a third time, letting the small white pieces of paper flutter down onto the counter like bitter confetti. "Now it's definitely not valid," she said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Have a nice day." The entire gate area fell silent. The act was so brazen, so shocking, that it seemed to suck the air out of the room. The kind woman who had touched Evelyn's arm gasped. David, the young agent, stared wide-eyed, his face pale. Bill, the supervisor, looked momentarily stunned, as if even he hadn't expected such a blatant act of aggression. For Evelyn, time seemed to slow down. She looked at the torn pieces of her ticket. They represented more than just a seat on a plane. They were a symbol of her right to be there, her professionalism, her very identity, all torn to shreds by a woman filled with inexplicable hate. The fury inside her coalesced into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. She raised her phone, making it obvious now that she was recording. She framed Carol's smirking face, then panned to Bill's weak, indecisive expression, and then to the torn ticket on the counter. "For the record," she said, her voice clear and ringing with authority, "my name is Dr. Evelyn Reed. The time is 9:15 a.m. At Chicago O'Hare, Gate K-19. Transcontinental Agent Carol Miller has just destroyed my valid boarding pass, and, with the approval of her supervisor, Bill, is denying me boarding based on what I can only assume are discriminatory reasons. This video, along with a formal complaint, will be sent to the Department of Transportation, the FAA, and the corporate offices of this airline." Carol's smirk faltered slightly. Bill's face went from pale to ashen. The mention of the FAA seemed to hit a nerve, but before either of them could respond, a new voice cut through the tense silence. A voice that was calm, deep, and carried an unmistakable weight of absolute authority. What in the goddamn hell is going on here? Every head at Gate K-19 swiveled towards the source of the voice. Standing at the edge of the boarding area, having just emerged from the jet bridge, was a man who instantly commanded the room. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that was clearly bespoke. He was in his late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a presence that radiated power. He was flanked by two other men in similar suits, their expressions grim. Most passengers assumed he was some sort of airline executive or perhaps a VIP who had been delayed. Evelyn, however, felt a jolt of recognition that was so intense it momentarily overshadowed her anger. Her mind raced, trying to place him. She knew that face. She'd seen it in industry journals, on news programs, and at the head of conference tables. Bill, the duty manager, scurried forward, attempting to take control of the situation. "Sir, I apologize for the commotion. We have a disruptive passenger we're handling. Everything is under control." The man's gaze was fixed on the scene at the counter, on Carol's defiant posture, on Bill's sycophantic panic, and on the torn pieces of paper on the floor. His eyes then landed on Evelyn, and a flicker of disbelief crossed his face, quickly replaced by a look of profound concern, and then a flash of cold, gathering rage. "Dr. Reed," the man said, his voice cutting through Bill's platitudes. He walked directly toward her, ignoring everyone else. "Evelyn, is that you?" Evelyn's mind finally clicked into place. Marcus Thorne. He was the administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, the head of the entire organization whose symposium she was flying to D.C. to address. Not only that, but they had met several times over the years. He had been a guest lecturer at MIT when she was finishing her doctorate, and had been an ardent champion of her team's work on sustainable fuel. He was, in essence, one of the most powerful people in the global aviation world, and he was the man she was scheduled to have dinner with tonight. "Administrator Thorne," Evelyn said, her voice a mixture of astonishment and immense relief. "Marcus. Yes, it's me." Marcus Thorne's eyes moved from her face down to the shredded boarding pass on the counter, then back up. The simmering anger in his expression began to boil over. He turned his head slowly, his gaze falling upon Bill, who now looked as if he was about to faint. "You have a disruptive passenger?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously low. "Are you referring to Dr. Evelyn Reed, the foremost propulsion expert in this country and the keynote speaker for my symposium?" Bill's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No sound came out. His entire world was crumbling in real time. Carol, however, was still operating under the delusion that she was in the right. Her ignorance of who Marcus Thorne was, combined with her stubborn prejudice, made her blind to the cataclysm that was about to unfold. "I don't care who she is," Carol declared, puffing out her chest. "Her ticket was flagged for fraud, and she was causing a disturbance. I followed protocol." Marcus Thorne turned the full force of his attention onto Carol. It was like watching a hawk focus on a mouse. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sheer weight of his fury was suffocating. "You followed protocol," he repeated, the words dripping with ice. "Let me be crystal clear. I just walked off this aircraft, where I was sitting in seat 1A, because the captain informed me that my keynote speaker, the guest of honor for this entire event, was being prevented from boarding. I came out here to see what minor logistical hiccup was causing the delay." He took a step closer to the counter, his eyes locking with Carol's. "Instead, I find you harassing a distinguished scientist and destroying airline property. So I'm going to ask you once. Show me this fraud alert. Show me the evidence on your screen right now that justifies this disgusting display." Carol's bravado finally shattered. She stammered, It was a temporary alert. Sometimes they clear." "Show me," Marcus commanded. Her hands trembled as she turned to her terminal. She typed, deleted, and typed again. Her face grew paler with each keystroke. There was nothing there. There never had been. The lie was laid bare for all to see. There's nothing here now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And there never was there?" Marcus said, though it wasn't a question. He looked at the young agent, David. "You." What's your name? David. David Chen, sir, the young man replied, his voice shaking. Mr. Chen, did you see a fraud alert on your system when you checked Dr. Reed's ticket? David swallowed hard, glancing at Carol, then at Bill, and finally back at the imposing figure of the FAA administrator. He chose the truth. No, sir. Her ticket was fully confirmed. It was green flagged. I told them. The final nail was in the coffin. The crowd of passengers murmured, the full scope of the injustice finally dawning on them. The kind woman who had tried to help Evelyn shook her head in disgust. The man in the pinstripe suit who had been so annoyed with Evelyn now had the decency to look ashamed. Marcus Thorne turned his gaze back to Bill. You're the duty manager? Yes, sir, Bill squeaked. And you allowed this to happen? You threatened to call security on Dr. Reed without even bothering to perform the most basic verification of your employee's claim. I was trying to de-escalate. De-escalate. Marcus's voice finally rose, echoing through the now silent terminal. You call siding with a liar and a bigot against a paying passenger de-escalation. You call allowing your agent to destroy a woman's boarding pass in front of 100 people handling the situation? You are a disgrace to your uniform and to this airline. He then looked back at Carol, whose face had crumpled into a mask of fear and disbelief. And you, he said, his voice dropping back to a lethal calm. Your career with this airline is over. In fact, I would be surprised if you ever work in any federally regulated aviation capacity in this country, ever again. He pulled out his own phone and dialed a number from memory. He didn't wait for pleasantries. Stephen, it's Marcus Thorne. Get me the CEO of Transcontinental Airways on the phone. Yes, right now. I don't care if he's in a meeting with the president. Tell him the FAA is about to ground his fleet at O'Hare if he's not on my line in 60 seconds. I am at gate K-19, and I am looking at an incident of what appears to be a federal hate crime committed by his staff. He hung up. The silence that followed was absolute. Evelyn stood watching, her own phone still recording. The initial shock had given way to a profound, almost surreal sense of vindication. It wasn't just that she had been proven right. It was that the system she had so little faith in just moments ago, the system of indifferent supervisors and unchecked power, had been utterly demolished by a man who represented the pinnacle of that very system. Marcus Thorne turned to her, his expression softening from pure rage to deep personal apology. Evelyn, on behalf of the entire aviation community, I am so sorry. I am horrified. Please, come with me. Let's get you on the plane. He gently took her arm, leading her towards the jet bridge. One of his aides swooped in, picking up her briefcase. As they walked past the petrified forms of Carol and Bill, Evelyn paused. She looked directly at Carol, whose eyes were now wide with panic and streaming with tears. Evelyn didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her calm, steady gaze said it all. You picked the wrong woman, on the wrong day, in front of the wrong man. As Evelyn and Marcus Thorne disappeared down the jet bridge, a strange paralysis held gate K-19 in its grip. Passengers stood frozen, phones in hand, many of them having recorded the explosive climax. The two aides Marcus had left behind stood like sentinels, their expressions unreadable, ensuring no one from the airline left the scene. Bill, the duty manager, finally broke the silence, whispering frantically into his walkie-talkie. We have a code red at K-19. I need all senior management here now, all of them. Get security down here too, but for crowd control, not for anything else. Carol Miller was no longer the smug tyrant of the counter. She was a broken woman. She had sunk onto her stool, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with ragged sobs. The reality of Marcus Thorne's words was crashing down on her. I'm going to lose my job, she muttered over and over again. My whole life. David, the junior agent, looked on with a grim expression. He felt a flicker of pity for her, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her cruelty. He had seen her be rude to passengers before, especially minority passengers. But he'd never seen anything like this. He'd been too intimidated to stand up to her. a fact that now filled him with a deep sense of shame. Within minutes, the gate area was swarming with people in suits. First came the airport-level executives, their faces pale with panic. Then came the regional vice president of Transcontinental, who had apparently been in another terminal. His name was Robert Stratton, and he looked like a man who had just been told his house was on fire. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice tight with anxiety as he approached Marcus Thorne's aides. "Tell me exactly what happened." One of the aides, a sharp-faced man named Peter, spoke in a monotone. "Your gate agent, Miss Carol Miller, with the compliance of your duty manager, Mr. Bill Hader, denied boarding to FAA Administrator Thorne's guest of honor, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Your agent made false accusations of fraud, refused to verify the ticket status, and publicly destroyed her boarding pass. The administrator witnessed the entire climax of the event. His call is currently being patched through to your CEO, Jonathan Caldwell." Robert Stratton's face went from pale to ghostly white. "Oh my God," he breathed. Jonathan Caldwell was a notoriously ruthless CEO. A call from the head of the FAA about a hate crime at a gate was not just a career-ending event for the people involved. It was a multi-million-dollar corporate disaster. "Secure their IDs," Stratton barked at an assistant. "Miller and Hader are suspended effective immediately. Get them off the floor. I want them in my office now." Two security guards who had arrived looking confused were now directed to escort Carol and Bill away. Carol went without a fight, shuffling like a prisoner on her way to sentencing. Bill, however, tried to argue. "Robert, you have to understand, it was a chaotic situation. I was just trying to support my staff and keep the flight on time." Stratton rounded on him, his face a mask of fury. "Keep the flight on time. Bill, that flight isn't going anywhere until I get a direct order from the FAA administrator, who is currently on board with our CEO on the line. You didn't just delay a flight. You may have just cost this airline its reputation and hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and lawsuits. Now get out of my sight." Bill deflated, all the fight gone out of him, and allowed himself to be led away through the gawking crowd. Meanwhile, on the plane, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The flight attendants were moving through the cabin, offering water and quiet apologies for the delay, their professional smiles strained. The first-class passengers who had witnessed the event were speaking in hushed, excited tones. In seat 2A, Evelyn sat by the window, her briefcase at her feet. Marcus Thorne was in 2C across the aisle. He had insisted she take his original seat, 1A, but she had politely declined, wanting a moment to herself. He respected her wish, but his protective, furious energy was still palpable. He was on the phone, and his voice was a low, controlled rumble that carried easily through the quiet cabin. "No, Jonathan, I don't think you do understand," Marcus was saying. "This wasn't a customer service misstep. This was a targeted, prejudiced attack on a brilliant woman, a guest of the United States government. Your employee didn't just rip up a piece of paper. She ripped up the trust that every single passenger has that they will be treated with basic human dignity." There was a pause. Evelyn could imagine the frantic apologies pouring from the CEO on the other end. "A personal apology is the bare minimum," Marcus continued. "That's table stakes. Here's what's going to happen. First, I want a full report on my desk by 9 a.m. tomorrow detailing the employment history of those two individuals, including every single customer complaint ever filed against them. I have a feeling this isn't Miss Miller's first rodeo." Another pause. "Second, your airline will be issuing a public statement and a direct formal apology to Dr. Reed. You will also be making a substantial donation to a nonprofit of Dr. Reed's choosing that promotes diversity in STEM fields. We can discuss the number of zeros later. It will be significant." Another pause, this one longer. "Third, and this is non-negotiable, you are going to overhaul your entire customer service and anti-discrimination training process from the ground up, and the FAA is going to audit it. We are going to make an example of this, Jonathan. I want every gate agent from Seattle to Miami to know that if they pull a stunt like this, they won't just be fired. They will be investigated, and the airline will face punitive action from the federal government." He listened for a final moment. Good. I'm glad we're on the same page. Now I suggest you authorize the captain to close the doors and get this plane in the air before I change my mind. He hung up. The cabin was utterly silent. He looked over at Evelyn, his expression a mix of anger and exhaustion. I'm sorry you had to hear that, Evelyn, but it needed to be said. Thank you, Marcus, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for seeing what was happening. There's nothing to thank me for, he said, shaking his head. I should thank you. You were composed, you were professional, and you stood your ground. You were a hell of a lot more dignified than I would have been in that situation. He leaned forward slightly. And that video you took? That is going to be the most powerful tool in this entire fight. Don't delete it. Send it to my chief of staff. We're going to use it. Just then, the captain's voice came over the intercom, sounding strained but professional. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller. My sincere apologies for the extended delay. We have been cleared for departure. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for takeoff. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, Evelyn looked out the window. She saw the flashing lights of airport vehicles still clustered around gate K-19. It looked like a crime scene. In a way, she thought, it was. The scene of a crime against decency, a crime of prejudice. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like justice was actually going to be served. The wheels of karma were in motion, and they were about to grind Carol Miller and Bill Hader into dust. Back in Robert Stratton's sterile office overlooking the airfield, Carol Miller and Bill Hader sat in uncomfortable silence. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the chilling dread of a formal inquiry. Stratton sat behind his large mahogany desk, flanked by a stern-faced woman from Human Resources and an even sterner-faced man from the airline's legal department. The air was thick with the scent of corporate panic. Let's start from the beginning, Stratton said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Miss Miller, explain to me again why you flagged Dr. Reed's ticket. Carol, her makeup streaked with tears, launched into a rambling, defensive narrative. Like I said, the terminal was acting slow. I got a flash on the screen, a little red box. It happens sometimes, a temporary alert. It usually means there's a credit card issue, a last-minute change, a fraud risk. So I was following my training. I needed to perform extra verification. The lawyer, a man named Arthur Graves, leaned forward. A red box? What did this red box say, specifically? I don't remember the exact words, Carol stammered. It was fast. It was just an alert. I was being cautious, for the airline's security. How convenient that this phantom alert disappeared the moment a federal authority figure asked to see it, Graves said dryly. He turned to the HR woman, Sandra. Have we pulled her terminal logs? Sandra nodded, tapping on her laptop. I have them right here. We've pulled every keystroke and system response from Carol's terminal for the past 2 hours. There were no alerts, no red boxes, no flags of any kind associated with Dr. Reed's passenger name record. The record was clean from the moment she checked in online yesterday to the moment she arrived at the gate. The room went cold. It was the digital proof, the black and white data that confirmed what everyone already knew. Carol had lied. Carol's face crumpled. No, that can't be right. Your system is wrong. There was an alert. I saw it. So now our entire IT infrastructure is lying, but you're telling the truth? Stratton snapped. The junior agent David Chen also stated there was no alert. He's giving his formal statement right now. Do you think he's lying too? Carol's defense crumbled into incoherent sobs. I've been here for 15 years. I have a perfect record. Sandra from HR cleared her throat. Actually, Robert, that's not entirely accurate. All eyes turned to her. She adjusted her glasses, her expression grim. In light of this incident, I did a deep dive into Miss Miller's file, that unblemished record that Bill mentioned. She shot a withering glare at the duty manager. It's far from it. She turned her laptop screen around. Over the past 5 years, Carol Miller has had 12 formal passenger complaints filed against her. 7 of them were for rude and unprofessional conduct. But it's the other 5 that are interesting. All 5 were filed by passengers of color, 3 black, 1 Hispanic, 1 Middle Eastern. The allegations are all remarkably similar: being unfairly singled out for extra security checks, being spoken to in a condescending manner, and facing unwarranted accusations about their documentation. "Why wasn't I made aware of this?" Stratton demanded, his face turning a shade of purple. "They were all handled at the supervisory level," Sandra said, looking pointedly at Bill. In each case, the complaint was dismissed by her direct supervisor as unsubstantiated after the supervisor spoke with Miss Miller. The supervisor who signed off on dismissing all 5 discrimination complaints was you, Bill. Bill Hader looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. I was just backing my people. You can't believe every angry passenger who misses a flight. Carol always had a plausible reason. Her plausible reasons just grounded a flight and got the CEO of this company a personal phone call from the head of the FAA. Graves, the lawyer, interjected, his voice like cracking ice. "You didn't back your employee, Mr. Hader. You enabled a serial bigot. You are as culpable in this as she is. Your negligence has exposed this company to catastrophic liability." The full weight of their actions finally seemed to crash down on Carol and Bill. It was no longer just about losing their jobs. This was about lawsuits, federal investigations, and public disgrace. The tweet exploded. Within an hour, it had thousands of retweets. The airline's handle was being flooded with furious messages. News outlets began picking up the story. Hashgate Agent Carol and HashFlyTCA were trending for all the wrong reasons. Evelyn's video, which Marcus Thorne's team had strategically released to a major news network, was now the lead story on their website. Her calm, professional narration of the events stood in stark contrast to Carol's vicious act, making the injustice even more pronounced. The corporate machine of Transcontinental Airways lurched into damage control mode. The statement they released was swift and unequivocal. It didn't use weasel words like "we are investigating" or "we apologize if anyone was offended." It was a full-throated condemnation of what had happened. Transcontinental Airways offers its deepest and most sincere apologies to Dr. Evelyn Reed for the abhorrent and discriminatory treatment she received from our employees today at Chicago O'Hare. The actions witnessed are a flagrant violation of everything our company stands for. The employees involved have been terminated, effective immediately. We are launching a top-to-bottom review of our anti-bias training, and we will do whatever it takes to regain the trust of our customers and, most importantly, of Dr. Reed. Back in the HR office, Arthur Graves read the statement aloud from his phone. He looked up at Carol and Bill. "Terminated," he said, the word hanging in the air. "You'll be escorted from the building. Your final paychecks will be mailed to you. Do not attempt to contact any other employees of this airline. A formal letter of termination will follow." Carol stared at him, her face a blank canvas of shock. 15 years of service gone in an instant. Her identity, her pension, her sense of superiority, all vaporized. Bill finally found his voice, a pathetic, pleading whimper. "My career, my family. Is there nothing I can do?" Graves gave him a look of pure contempt. "You could have done something this morning, Mr. Hader. You could have done your job. You could have been a manager. You could have stood up for what was right instead of what was easy. But you didn't. And now, you're going to have to live with that." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "Security will see you out." As the 2 disgraced employees were led away, their careers in ruins, the story was still just beginning. The consequences were rippling outwards, far beyond the confines of Gate K-19, and the true extent of the karma they had unleashed upon themselves was only just starting to become clear. By the time Evelyn's flight touched down at Reagan National, her phone was vibrating nonstop. Her story was no longer just a viral tweet, it was national news. News vans were already camped outside the FAA headquarters where the symposium was being held. Her company's PR department had called, offering their full support. Friends and family were texting, a mixture of outrage and concern. Marcus Thorne had a car waiting on the tarmac. a black sedan that whisked them away from the main terminal, bypassing the burgeoning media circus. "It's a storm now," Marcus said, looking at his own phone with a grim expression. "But sometimes storms are necessary. They clear the air." "I never wanted this kind of attention," Evelyn confessed, looking out the window at the Washington monuments flashing by. "I just wanted to get to my conference." "You didn't ask for it," Marcus agreed. "But you have a platform now, Evelyn, whether you want it or not. What you do with it is up to you." The symposium opened the next morning to a packed house. When Marcus Thorne took the stage to give his opening remarks, he didn't start with talk of policy or technology. He started by addressing the incident at O'Hare. He spoke for 10 minutes, his voice resonating with anger and resolve. He called it a cancer of prejudice that the industry had to root out. And he pledged that the FAA would use its full regulatory power to ensure accountability. Then he introduced Evelyn. "And now it is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, a woman whose brilliance is matched only by her grace under pressure. A woman who yesterday faced down ignorance and bigotry and reminded us all that the fight for dignity is a fight we must all be willing to wage. Dr. Evelyn Reed." The entire auditorium, filled with airline CEOs, engineers, pilots, and government officials, rose to its feet in a thunderous standing ovation. The applause went on for a full 2 minutes. As Evelyn walked to the podium, she was overwhelmed with emotion. Yesterday, she had been made to feel small and powerless. Today, she was being celebrated as a hero. She delivered her speech on sustainable aviation flawlessly, but at the end, she went off script. "Technology can solve many things," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It can make planes fly faster, farther, and cleaner, but it cannot fix what is broken in the human heart. It cannot engineer empathy or build compassion. That is our job." The events of yesterday were not about a boarding pass. They were a reminder that for some of us, our credentials, our accomplishments, and our very humanity are always up for debate. We have to be better. This industry has to be better. The second standing ovation was even longer than the first. The fallout for Transcontinental Airways was massive. Their stock price dipped 8% in 2 days. Boycotts were being organized online. The video of Carol ripping the ticket was now an inescapable meme, a symbol of corporate failure. CEO Jonathan Caldwell, true to his word, was on a frantic apology tour, but the public was skeptical. The internal investigation revealed the depth of the rot Bill Hader had allowed to fester. The other 5 discrimination complaints against Carol were reopened. The passengers were contacted and offered significant compensation and public apologies. 2 of them joined a class action lawsuit that was being formed against the airline. David Chen, the young agent, became a key witness, his testimony painting a damning picture of a toxic work environment where prejudice was an open secret, tolerated by indifferent management. But the most devastating karma was reserved for Carol and Bill. Bill Hader was unemployable. The moment a potential employer Googled his name, the story from O'Hare would be the first result. The title duty manager was now inextricably linked to his spectacular failure of duty. He lost his house within 6 months. His wife, humiliated by the scandal, left him. He was a pariah in the industry he had worked in his entire adult life. For Carol Miller, the consequences were even more severe. Her digital footprint became a minefield. Old social media posts were unearthed by online sleuths, revealing a long history of racially charged comments and conspiracy theories. It turned out her bitterness wasn't just a bad attitude. It was a deeply ingrained ideology of hate. She was doxxed. Her address was leaked. She received threats. She had to move, to change her name. But the infamy of being Gate Agent Carol followed her. The video of her ripping that ticket became her legacy, a digital ghost that haunted her every move. She couldn't get a job in retail, let alone in a professional capacity. The power she had so desperately craved and so viciously abused was gone, leaving a hollowed-out life filled with regret and public scorn. The world had seen her true face, and it had looked away in disgust. One evening, months later, a local news station ran a follow-up story. They found her working as a cleaner in a 24-hour diner 60 miles outside of Chicago, working the graveyard shift. The reporter approached her, camera rolling. "Miss Miller, do you have anything to say to Dr. Evelyn Reed? Do you feel any remorse for what you did?" Carol, looking tired and much older than her years, just shook her head and scurried away, shielding her face from the camera. The smirk was gone. The defiant glint in her eye was gone. All that remained was the pathetic shadow of a woman broken by the consequences of her own hate. The karma hadn't just been a slap on the wrist. It had been a complete and total demolition of her life, brick by painful brick. A year after the incident at Gate K-19, the aviation industry looked subtly but significantly different. What happened to Evelyn Reed was not just a viral moment. It became a catalyst. It had a name: the Reed Incident. And it forced a reckoning that was long overdue. Transcontinental Airways, under immense pressure, had followed through on its promises. Jonathan Caldwell, the CEO, knew that superficial changes wouldn't be enough. He personally sought out Evelyn, and in a move that stunned the industry, offered her a paid consultant position to help oversee the overhaul of their training programs. After much consideration, she accepted, on the condition that her recommendations would be binding. She helped create what became known as the Dignity at the Gate protocol. It was a rigorous training module that moved beyond generic diversity slideshows. It used real-life scenarios, including a detailed breakdown of her own experience, to teach de-escalation, cultural competency, and implicit bias recognition. A key part of the new protocol was a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, backed by a clear, anonymous reporting system that bypassed local supervisors and went directly to a corporate ethics board. Every single one of Transcontinental's 80,000 employees was required to complete it. Other airlines, seeing the positive press TCA was finally getting for its reforms, began adopting similar programs. Marcus Thorne also used the incident to push through new federal regulations. The FAA, for the first time, issued a clear directive making discriminatory behavior by airline staff a specific finable offense for the airline itself, with penalties scaling up for repeat issues at a particular airport or with a particular employee. An airline's record on discrimination complaints would now be a factor in awarding routes and airport gate leases. The financial incentive to take bias seriously was now baked into the law. Evelyn, for her part, found an unexpected new calling. She didn't quit her job as an engineer. Her love for the science of flight was too deep. But she dedicated a significant portion of her time to advocacy. She and Marcus Thorne co-founded the Lift and Elevate Foundation, a non-profit funded by TCA's mandatory donation and contributions from other corporate sponsors. Its mission was twofold: to provide scholarships for women and minorities pursuing careers in aerospace, and to advocate for passenger rights and equitable treatment across the entire travel industry. She still flew frequently, but things were different now. She was often recognized. Flight attendants would quietly thank her. Gate agents seemed to treat every passenger, especially passengers of color, with a newfound level of professionalism and respect, always aware that any one of them could be the next Dr. Reed. The story had become a cautionary tale, a legend whispered in break rooms and training sessions. One afternoon, waiting to board a flight from Atlanta, a young black woman in a pilot's uniform approached her. She looked nervous, but her eyes shone with admiration. "Dr. Reed?" she asked. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm a first officer for this flight. I read about what happened to you last year when I was just finishing flight school. It was all anyone could talk about. I hope it was for the right reasons," Evelyn said with a warm smile. "It was," the young pilot confirmed. "It made us all feel seen. It made the airline see us. What you did, how you handled it, it changed things. It made it easier for people like me. So, thank you." Evelyn felt a familiar swell of emotion, but it was different from the pride she felt looking at an engine she designed. This was something deeper. It was the feeling of having turned a moment of profound ugliness into a legacy of positive change. As she boarded the plane, she took her seat by the window and looked out at the bustling tarmac. She thought back to that day at O'Hare, to the humiliation and the fury. She thought of Carol Miller, a woman so consumed by bitterness that she had to tear others down to feel tall. Evelyn felt a brief, fleeting pang of pity for her, not of forgiveness, but of a sad understanding of how a poisoned soul could self-destruct. Carol's life was a testament to the fact that hate is a prison, and the ultimate sentence is a life lived alone with the wreckage of your own choices. The plane's engine spooled up with a powerful roar. It was a sound Evelyn knew intimately, the sound of lift, of power, of forward momentum. She had faced a storm of injustice, and hadn't just weathered it. She had harnessed its energy. She had proven that one person, armed with dignity and the truth, could indeed change the world, or at least a little piece of it, for the better. The flight was smooth, and as the plane climbed through the clouds towards the sun, Dr. Evelyn Reed knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. That, right there, is a story about more than just a bad day at the airport. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the universe has a way of balancing the scales. The story of Dr. Evelyn Reed shows us the incredible strength it takes to maintain your dignity in the face of blatant prejudice. But it's also a story of epic, life-altering karma. Carol Miller thought she was untouchable, that she could humiliate someone without consequence, but she ended up losing everything. It's a stark warning to anyone who thinks their little bit of power gives them the right to dehumanize others. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that this kind of justice needs to be seen and heard, then please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true stories of drama and sweet, sweet karma. Your support helps us tell these important stories. Thanks for listening.